On this episode of Shit Show Earth, first we're going to hear from Desperate in Cincinnati, who has a problem with his sister's blowhard boyfriend. Then we're going to touch base with Bink, our correspondent, who's on assignment with the Klown Kar Collective. That's right, the Klown Kar Collective. Then we're going to discuss 4 principles of productive public discourse. It's going to be interesting, and I hope you'll stick around. Welcome to Shit Show Earth. This is where we help you try to figure out the shit that just shows up in your life. My name is Jenny, and I'm going to be your host. As you can see, I am very philosophical. Every episode, I'm going to apply a philosophical toolset to solving a problem that's been presented to us by a random stranger. Those are the best kind. So today our problem comes from Desperate in Cincinnati. Desperate writes, "Dear Shit Show, my sister has a new boyfriend who spews his opinions like a glitchy old geyser at Yellowstone National Park. You never know what's going to set him off, and his opinions are about as welcome as being sprayed with hot, acidic bog water. He seems to think we all agree with him about everything. He's such an entitled douchebag that it never occurs to him to take a breath once in a while and allow someone else to speak. It's pretty obvious from the garbage that comes out of the fountain hole mouth of his that he's a member of the Klown Kar Collective. I certainly am not, nor are most of my family members. I honestly don't think Blowhard has even noticed the uncomfortable silence that frequently follows his grandiose explosions. I don't know how to deal with him, and unfortunately, murder is still not an option. Please help. Sincerely, Desperate in Cincinnati." Well, I think this problem is really relatable. I think that there's probably a blowhard in everyone's life. Now, there are some that we can avoid, and then there are some that we just can't avoid, so we have to solve the problem. And so this is the problem we're going to take on this week. Now, I have a rating system that I use here on Shit Show for the problems that I like to try to solve, and I've rated this problem a down boy. And this problem is a down boy because the solution is going to require a slight behavioral change. Now, I'm not talking about a behavioral change on Blowhard's part. I'm talking about a slight behavioral change on your part, Desperate in Cincinnati. So, but in order to see exactly what kind of behavioral change to propose as a solution, we decided to learn a little bit more about the Klown Kar Collective. So we sent our correspondent, Bink, and her undercover cameraman on assignment to the National Klown Kar Collective meeting that was held in Washington, D.C. earlier this week. So let's see how that meeting went. I'm Bink. I'm so glad to be here. This is my first... What? The salute? Oh, okay. We have to start with the salute. Oh, okay. Oh, not that one. Oh, my bad. Oh, this one. Okay. Sorry. Klown Kar Collective, KKK. So happy to be here. Yay, yay, yay. Woo. Okay, so, oh my goodness, I really messed up. Okay, so this is the how to own the X-tards meeting, right?
Booyah!
Good. Okay, good. Well, I was a little bit concerned that I ended up at the wrong meeting. I mean, who wants to go to a seminar on how to undermine women and minorities? I mean, that sounds so boring. Oh my God, like owning the X-tards, that's good stuff, right?
Yeah, all right.
Exactly. You know. Yeah. All right. So I have a strategy about how to own the X-tards that I'd like to share with you. And my strategy is be clever. Well, I mean, be clever. It's like be best, but online. Right? No, hear me out. Like, because everybody knows that the great awakening is happening online. We have to take back the online. We have to storm social media. That's right. Storm social media. We need to put down that awakening. They're ruining our lives. That's right. Yes. 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 So, everybody knows that the X-tards love the online. It's their playground, right? So, Hollywood X-tards.
Boo!
You know, Hollywood, they're all X-tards in Hollywood pretty much, right? Except for maybe like a handful of the good ones, but still, right? I mean, they love the Twitter. They do. They love the Twitter. They love to flock there at ungodly hours wearing nothing but their underpants. I mean, my kids have seen these people on Disney. Nobody wants to think about Chris Evans fondling his politics while it peeps out of his underpants. I mean, what's next, Marvel? Captain Underpants, please, right? And YouTube has become X-tard church. It's true. They get on there to worship a transgender woman they call the Dark Mother.
Hallelujah!
They should call their church Apocalypse Now. Because that's what it is. It's an apocalypse that's happening now. Like right now. Yeah. Check your phones. She's there. So, I have 4 examples of clever strategies for owning the X-tards. I almost called them the Lex-tards, you know, like Lex Luthor, and you know, we're like the superheroes, but it doesn't work. So, yeah. So, so I have 4 examples of these strategies that we can employ online to take back the online world, right? Good. And if we can't be clever, who can? We're the Klown Kar Collective. We can do this. We just have to storm the comments. Everybody reads the comments. Everybody goes online for the comments. It's all about the comments, right? Yeah. Okay, so here's how to win friends and influence people online in the comments. Okay, clever idea. Number 1. X-tards love to say that trans women are women. Have these people looked in the mirror lately? I mean... Gender is a social construct. Anyone who believes that is a bag of poopy jock straps. is like really sprung from being pulled on just a little bit too hard for a little bit too long, right? And the booty loops. Booty loops. They're like caked with Crisco. Yeah, like somebody overgreased the muffin pan. That was in the 80s. Yeah. Okay, well, number two. Okay, so, hypocrites. Oh, dear God, hypocrites. Pooter. Senator Pooter. You know the one. Yes, that Pooter. Oh, no. He likes the Twitter. And he recently got on there and he said, and I quote, "We should be tracking all of the money from the NRA that is going through our political system." I mean, like what, a bowel movement? I mean, he makes it sound like there's like intestinal activity happening here. It's gross. But anyway, this is the same Pooter who took big tech money for his re-election campaign. I mean, that's big money. Money. He's a hypocrite. And everybody knows we do not have to listen to hypocrites. Ever. Everything they say is wrong. Everything they say is false. I mean, he could say that there's no gravity and, well, that's false. There's gravity. Well, it would be more like saying that you're pro-life, but anti-feeding children, right? Like Frau Gutenstock, the lunch lady at your kid's school, getting to decide who eats and who doesn't, right? I mean, line up for the inspection. You, too brown. You make funny noises. And you smell like salsa. Yuck. Nein. All right. Number three. X-tards are always going on and on about equality this and equality that. Do you know what equality looks like to them? It looks like this. Fuck around, find out. That's right. Lawlessness, chaos, destruction. This is the mascot that they chose when they stole an election. Stealing is wrong.
Yes!
It's just, you know it's wrong. Bad. Very bad. You shouldn't be doing that. They just want chaos. Well, we can't have that. Number 4. Do you remember that very famous Hollywood X-tard who said, "The best way to lower the crime rate is to round up all of the men and kill them"? Like, seriously? These people are so dumb. All of them. I mean, that is just like a representative of the entire X-tard population. Dumb. They don't even know where babies come from. Oh, seriously. I mean, I guess they have so much money. They can just buy them from foreign countries. You know, like, here, kitty, here, kitty. Not you, sweetie. You wouldn't look good on social media. Here, kitty. This is not what we want for our future, for our children, and for our country. So I say we must own the X-tards once and for all by being With us now from Washington, D.C. is our correspondent, Bink. Welcome to the show, Bink. It is so good to see you. Hi! Yeah, good. It's so great to be here. Yeah. Bink, I understand that you just attended the national meeting of the Klown Kar Collective in Washington, D.C. Can you tell us a little bit about that meeting? Oh, it was so much fun. Oh my goodness, it was fun. Actually, I'm lying. It was kind of scary. We were strategizing ways to own the X-tards. Can you share some of those strategies with us? Well, yeah, it mostly just consisted in unconstitutional proposals, informal logical fallacies, and online propaganda, that sort of thing. It's just the usual. Can you be more specific? Well, they let me speak, and I proposed 4 ways to rule them all. Yeah, it was really hard pretending I'm not an X-tard. I was just gonna own myself. But anyway, so basically it was just a strategy to disrupt public discourse. And undermining the function of social discourse is really just the best way to undermine democracy. So they loved it. They ate it up. Which fallacies did you choose? Oh, I don't know. It was just the usual, those fallacies that you normally see people using in the online world. It's ad hominem. Oh, that's a favorite. Oh, everybody loves that one, right? So there's ad hominem, and then there's tu quoque, which people love that one too. And then what else did I do? Oh, that's right. I did straw man and hasty generalization. So ad hominem is a fallacy that occurs when you actually attack a person rather than attacking their view. So if they say something that you disagree with, you say, well, I think you're wrong because you're a poop head, or something similar, or maybe a poopy jockstrap with greasy booty loops. Anyway, that's it's just a personal joke. Anyway, so that's ad hominem. You see that a lot online, and people love to call each other names and say, well, you're wrong because you're basically a greasy booty loop. And that's the fallacy, right? Okay, so the tu quoque is one where basically you're accusing another person of being a hypocrite, and that you're saying, I don't have to listen to you because you're a hypocrite. So a person will say, well, here's a claim that I think is true, and then you say, oh, well, that claim is false because you're guilty of doing the same thing. Well, again, that attacks the person, it doesn't attack the view, right? So if you're going to be logical, you have to actually, look at the evidence that they supply for their view. If they supply any evidence, half the time they don't. They just like to make claims and say, I'm entitled to my opinion. And, they really aren't. Nobody's entitled to the opinion that they have. Everybody's entitled to have an opinion, because good Lord, they have brains, right? So they can come up with that shit as they're just sitting around eating Cheetos in their mother's basement. But nobody's actually entitled to the particular opinion that they have. That's a confusion that a lot of people have. Anyway, so there's tu quoque. That is where people accuse you of being a hypocrite. They don't have to. They don't have to listen to what you say because, well, look, you're guilty. And then there's straw man, and straw man is so much fun. It's a lot of fun. Oh my God! It's where you basically just give a really uncharitable interpretation of your opponent's view, and then you say, well, that's just dumb. Well, yeah, it's because you made it dumb, dummy. Whatever. So yeah, that one's really common too. People like to blow a person's ideas way out of proportion and say, well, you'd have to be dumb to believe that. Well, yeah, you're the one who came up with that argument, so you must be dumb. That's not my argument. But hey, if that's the argument you think is dumb, you're dumb. Whatever. Anyway. See, this is why I'm not a logician. This is why I'm a correspondent. Okay, and then the last one is hasty generalization, and of course they loved this one because what it basically does is it gives you license to use stereotypes, and people just love to use stereotypes. Oh boy, do they love it. It's like the white bread of white bread. Or is it sliced bread better than, I don't know, it's very white sliced bready. Something like that. And I just can't remember my idioms when I'm filming. Okay, so anyway, the hasty generalization is where you draw a conclusion about every member of a category based on one instance, or just a handful of instances, right? So one X-tard says something you think is ridiculous, and then suddenly all X-tards are ridiculous. I mean, that's a little bit hasty, right? I mean, that's like one person's opinion, and yeah, they're probably not entitled to have that particular opinion, but they have an opinion, and they poop it out there on social media. Oh boy, do they ever. And well, yeah, so that's just very anti-science. It's very anti-empirical. I mean, science is based on the idea that you have to get a very large sample size, you know, and a representative sample size before you can draw a generalization about any group of things. And so, you know, it's just bad. It's bad empirical reasoning. It's very bad. Are you suggesting that most people don't engage in public discourse for the purpose of discovering social, moral, and political truths, but rather they engage in public discourse just to protect and promote what they already believe is true? Well, I think that there are a lot of reasons why people do what they do online. I mean, some people just like to feel clever and funny, and you know, logical fallacies can be really funny and clever seeming. You know, if you're not trying to have a legitimate discussion about social, moral, or political issues. If you're really not engaged in public discourse, you're really not interested in you know, doing democracy, right? If the game is just to be silly, well, fine. But if it's really, people are trying to be serious about this, then it's really inappropriate. But so some people just like to try to be clever and funny. And I don't want to generalize to what everybody does online, because that would be a hasty generalization. But I think that the Klown Kar Collective specifically seems to be very interested in defending their own views, whatever the cost, even at the cost of democracy itself. And that's really sort of problematic. I mean, that's what makes the whole thing really scary. That's pretty eye-opening. Yeah, it's a little depressing, actually, because I know a lot of what they believe is just contrary to science. And, you know, science is science. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's really good. I mean, if Einstein's theory of relativity wasn't true, we wouldn't even have cell phones, so I'm just saying. Well, the world has been changing, and not necessarily for the better. Bink, thank you so much for reporting in, and we look forward to hearing more about your assignment with the Klown Kar Collective. Yeah, okay, it's been great. Okay, thanks, bye! Okay, well, welcome back. And what we saw in our footage from the Klown Kar Collective meeting is that they are engaged in a form of public discourse. Now, public discourse is quite simply discussion of moral, social, and political issues in a public forum. And it is the heart and soul of a liberal democracy. Now, there are different ways to pursue discourse, public discourse, and some of those ways are going to be more productive than others, right? So, unproductive public discourse focuses on the kinds of things we saw at the Klown Kar Collective. First, there was uncritical repetition of beliefs that serve as indicators of group membership. Second, there was uncharitable interpretation of the beliefs of non-group members. And third, there was an unwillingness to engage with non-group members in rational discourse about beliefs with which they may disagree. Now, the aim of unproductive discourse is simply the expression of group membership and group identity. And there is a sociological benefit to this activity. But there is really very little moral or social benefit to this activity when you have a very diverse society. Part of the reason is because it reinforces in-group and out-group behavior, where out-group members are often presented as stereotypes or caricatures. And these can often become justification for violence against out-group members. And we have seen quite a lot of that over the last couple of years, unfortunately. Now, there are rules that govern all of our social behaviors, and these rules are called social norms. And we learn them through processes of socialization. So that means that just by interacting with people in your social groups, you learn how to behave appropriately. So you can always tell when you or someone else has subtly disobeyed a social norm, because people in the group will start to become uncomfortable, or you'll become embarrassed for another person because they've done something that is just not right. Okay, so people sometimes who are very socially awkward sometimes have a hard time grasping social norms or enacting social norms because of their anxiety, and so they're doing things in public that embarrass themselves and others because they're having a hard time obeying certain social norms. Sometimes because they can't grasp them, or sometimes because they just can't behave that way because of anxiety. So there are norms that govern. If you look at it sociological sort of social categories, and you look at the structures and institutions of society, you'll see that there are so many different kinds of norms, right? We do behave in a very rule-based ways, and we don't even realize it. It's very implicit. Okay, so conversation is a social behavior. So there are norms that are going to govern our conversational behavior. Now, the norms that govern unproductive public discourse are going to be very different from the norms that govern productive public discourse. Productive public discourse focuses on inquiry. Now remember, let's just quickly refresh. Unproductive public discourse focuses on the reinforcement of group identity or group membership, right? It's an expression of an identity. Whereas productive public discourse focuses on inquiry, and inquiry is a form of discourse that's governed by the aim of discovering truth. So we're talking with one another, we're debating ideas in an effort to discover some truths, some social, moral, and political truths. And when we do that, it helps us participate more actively and appropriate in our own democratic governance. That is how a democracy is supposed to work. So public discourse, productive public discourse, is a really vital component to a very healthy liberal democracy. Now, I have derived 4 conversational principles from the norms of public discourse. Productive public discourse, I should say. And I'm going to share these principles with you because they are deeply tied to the solution to the problem that we were presented with at the beginning of this episode. When you change your conversational goals and you change your conversational the norms that govern your conversational behavior in search of in an attempt to satisfy those conversational goals, other people are going to follow suit. That's just how it works, right? Social behavior is just once somebody changes the norms by which a certain activity is taking place, people just automatically follow suit. We're made that way. We evolved to do this. So if you're having trouble with somebody in conversation, if you shift the conversational norms, you shift your own conversational behavior to a different aim, oftentimes people will follow suit. Now, not everybody is going to pick up on these sorts of social cues because some people just don't. But a lot of people do because we're very, very good at it. It's a very natural kind of process that we go through. And we are constantly shifting between conversational contexts and different aims for our conversational activities. And that's just one example of the kinds of norms that we're constantly fluctuating between every moment of every day. So it's a very easy thing for us to do. But you can consciously shift that process, and you can encourage other people to engage with you more productively. So let's take a quick look at these 4 principles. Okay, here are the 4 principles of productive public discourse. Now, I'm going to give you the norm that's associated with this principle, right? And then I'm going to give you the principle that's derived from that norm. So the first principle is the principle of good reasoning. The norm associated with this is this: the aim of inquiry is the discovery of truth. So it should be governed by rules of reasoning that are intended to preserve truth. These rules are the standard rules of logic. The principle associated with this norm is this: activities associated with inquiry require the use of standard logical reasoning. Now, there are a lot of things passing for logical reasoning on the internet these days, and I'm sad to tell you that a lot of it is not the kind of reasoning that is going to be worth your time if you really want to engage in public discourse that's productive. Now, high school style debate is not necessarily the kind of discussion that's productive. High school style debate is about winning, right? It's a game. It's a type of game that's about winning. It has a completely different aim than productive public discourse. It's not about discovering truth. It's about winning a particular game. The rules of logic, the standard rules of logic, are just rules about how the process of reasoning in our brain actually works, right? So here's the standard of good reasoning. People over the years, many logicians over many years have standardized those rules. So if you understand those rules, then you can behave appropriately when you're engaged in public discourse. High school style debate, again, has a completely different objective. It's about winning a particular kind of game, and that is not productive public discourse. Now, I'm going to provide you with some resources on how you can come to familiarize yourself with the standard rules of logic. You don't have to get too carried away with it. I mean, here's a very simple way of understanding basically how these rules work. There's a very, very general way in which these rules work, and it's this: that you have a claim, right? So you might have a statement. It's going to be a statement. It can be either true or false, right? So it's a statement, something like, human activity is responsible for climate change. Okay, that's a claim. That's a statement. It can be either true or false. And in order for me to be giving this statement in accordance with this principle, I'm going to have to be able to explain to you what my evidence is in support of that claim. Good reasoning is just the standard process of looking at evidence that supports certain claims. And you can examine the evidence and say whether or not you think that evidence is good evidence. If it's good evidence, then the claim probably stands. If it's bad evidence, then the claim probably needs to be either revised or dropped. Okay? So if the claim is something like, for instance, just the claim that I made about human activity being responsible for climate change, presumably, if I believe that that claim is true, then I'm going to have reasons, according to this principle, to think that that's true. And so if I'm engaged with in inquiry with somebody who's not sure about the truth of that claim, I should be able to give them my reasons. And then they should have a right to examine those reasons and probe those reasons to find out whether or not they think those are good reasons or bad reasons. And then discussion often happens around those reasons, right? Just saying, no, your claim is false, that's not productive public discourse. And that's not how rational, logical debate actually works, right? So it's not high school style debate. It is the looking at evidence, weighing evidence, and discussing evidence. That's not high school style debate. It's a completely different activity. It's logic. It's actually using the standard processes of logic, okay? So that's principle number one. Now, as I said, in my show notes, I will provide some resources for you if you're interested in learning more about standard rules of logic and how they actually differ and how this process actually differs from high school style debate that has become really popular among YouTube personalities or different online personalities that like to promote rational thinking. It's very different. Okay, number two, the principle of charity. The norm is this: The aim of inquiry is the discovery of truth. So inquirers should frame relevant, alternative viewpoints as accurately as possible so that good reasoning is productive. You don't want to... This is also something that sometimes happens in this so-called rational debate, is that people will engage a lot in informal logical fallacies, as we saw from the sort of fallacies that Bink showed us in our segment, our on assignment segment. People will sometimes engage in formal logical fallacies because it seems clever, but in fact it is bad reasoning. And these will often be done in the service of producing a very uncharitable view of an opponent, right? Should really be thought of as a conversational partner, but a lot of times people think of people who have different beliefs as opponents, okay? Well, in actuality, you're not having productive public discourse at that point. You're engaged in unproductive public discourse. So you're doing a completely different activity. Now, if you want to do productive public discourse, then you're going to need to frame their view charitably. You're going to need to present it in the most rational, logical light possible, so that you can actually look and see what evidence supports your claims, right? You might disagree with the person's claims, but you might think that they have some pretty good evidence in support of that, so you need to do further research to find out, is this really good evidence? It seems like really good evidence, but is it really? And, do I need to adjust my beliefs according to this new evidence that I have never looked at before? All right, so the principle here is when you are trying to figure out another person's opinion on an issue, you are required to choose the interpretation that presents their position in the most rational and truthful light possible. Again, this is in service of principle number 1, which is just the principle of good reasoning, right? So the principle of charity is supposed to enable you to apply principle number 1. All right, that's principle 2. Principle 3. Again, this principle is in service to principle number 1. Number 3, the principle of generally accepted assumptions. Now, here's the norm. The aim of inquiry is the discovery of truth. So inquirers should use assumptions in their reasoning processes that promote discourse and the search for truth. Okay, now, it's not possible when you're engaged in discourse to provide evidence for every single claim you want to make. Some of the evidence that you're going to supply in support of one claim, you have to just use an assumption there, right? So we can assume that all people are mortal. That's an assumption some people are willing to, agree to. And that's an assumption that you can make if you want to discuss another issue that relies on that claim. You don't have to actually argue for that. You don't have to provide evidence in support of that too, unless somebody presses you on that. But if you're just trying to make a different point, you don't have to argue for every single claim that you raise. But those assumptions that you raise should be generally accepted, right? So what this principle does is it eliminates the possibility of wasting time discussing conspiracy theories, right? So here's the principle. Any assumptions you use in standard logical reasoning must either be A, widely accepted by participants in the domain of inquiry, or B, acceptable to any interlocutors for the sake of discussion, right? So I am not going to approach somebody who I know does not believe in a particular conspiracy theory and say, well, this is my assumption in this claim I want to make and discuss with you. You're basically just putting a person in the position of not having anything to say because you already know they don't accept that assumption. So that's not going to be a productive discourse. But you might say to them, okay, just for the sake of discussion, will you be willing to assume the truth of this claim? It might be a conspiracy theory. It might be something about lizard people and the government. Okay, but you ask your interlocutor, you ask your discussion partner. That's what an interlocutor is. It's just a person that you're having a discussion with, your conversational partner. You ask them, are you willing to accept this assumption? You acknowledge it's an assumption. Are you willing to accept this for the sake of discussion? If they say yes, then you can proceed. But if they say no, then there's no point in pushing further because you're just not engaged in productive discussion at that point. You're engaged in unproductive public discourse. In other words, you're just beating your chest and saying, I belong to this group of people who believes in lizard people. Okay, well, then you're doing a whole nother activity at this point. Okay? So, So principle of generally accepted assumptions is really, it serves principle number 1, which is productive rational discourse, but it also serves the overall aim of productive discourse, right? You cannot engage in productive public discourse if you are not working with assumptions that people are willing to work with, even for the sake of discussion. All right, the 4th principle. Now this is really important. The 4th principle is this, the principle of scientifically consistent evidence. All right, here's the norm. The aim of inquiry is the discovery of truth. So any inquiry that makes use of empirical evidence in standard logical reasoning should be consistent with our best science. What does that mean? What does empirical mean? Well, empirical evidence is the kind of evidence that we can get, the kind of information we can get by observing the world, right? So technically, empirical data is just data that's gathered through sensory observations, through our 5 senses. And our scientific instruments are just extensions of our 5 senses, right? So microscopes and telescopes and gas chromatographs and all these different kinds of scientific equipments that we have and that we use are just ways to extend our natural senses. They help us probe into the domain, the small, the very small, or the very large, or the very distant, right? They help amplify our senses. So all of the information we can gather about the world, about the way things exist, through scientific methods or through just observational methods, that's all empirical data, right? So if you're going to be making empirical claims, then you need to have, those empirical claims need to adhere to a particular standard. And the scientific methodology is a very rigorous standard for the truth of empirical claims, right? There are all kinds of different practices that make empirical claims. So religions make empirical claims. They make claims about the way the world is. The book of Genesis makes claims about the way the world came to be. That's an empirical claim. We can actually investigate that scientifically. And scientifically, we don't believe the creation story is literal, right? Maybe it's metaphorical, whatever. That doesn't mean that detracts from the value of a religious text. It just means that religions make empirical claims that are not grounded in science necessarily. They're not intended to be grounded in science. So if you're going to be having a discussion with somebody and you're interested in discovering truths, then you need to be providing empirical claims that are subjected to very rigorous standards that are intended to produce truth. Okay, so if I make the claim that I think that climate change is the result of human activities, then there are going to be a lot of empirical claims that I'm going to have to make in support of that one, right? So my evidence for that claim is going to be empirical data. And that empirical data better line up with our best science, because if it doesn't, I'm not engaged in inquiry, I'm engaged in some other activity. I am not engaged in productive public discourse. So the principle here, the 4th principle, is this. If you use empirical evidence in your reasoning processes, that evidence must be consistent with our best science. Now, that's not always easy because we don't always know. But this is where it's important to have discussion with people, because sometimes you realize how much you don't know. I mean, there are all kinds of cognitive biases that we suffer from as human beings, where we think we know a lot more than we actually do. And once we start discussing something with somebody and we're trying to look at the evidence that we have in support of the things that we believe, or look at the evidence that somebody else presents in support of what they believe, we might find that neither of us really knows as much as we thought we did, and we need to do a little more research. That is productive public discourse. That's productive discussion, because it encourages us to go out and to find more information, better information. We're learning something, we're growing, we're moving closer to a truth, right? And that is what productive public discourse is supposed to be. So we shouldn't be afraid of discovering that we don't know as much as we thought we did. None of us know as much as we think we do. And that is just the way the human mind works. We always think we know more than we actually do. So you're not going to know how much you don't know unless you're willing to engage with other people and willing to accept that maybe you need to do a little more research. So these are the 4 principles. Now, finally, here we are at the end of our episode. how can these 4 principles and everything that we've learned today help us solve the problem presented to us by Desperate in Cincinnati? Well, here's my suggestion. Now, what Blowhard appears to be doing is engaging in unproductive public discourse. Excuse me. He appears to be trying to do some kind of social bonding by constantly just expressing his own beliefs and his own opinions, right? That's unproductive public discourse. It's the expression of group membership. He might be trying to bond. He might be trying to express that he needs some sort of sense of belonging, right? But when he does this, it requires him to assume that you also belong to the same ideological group that he does, and that's an assumption that you need to refute, and you need to do that in a non-threatening way. So you need to find a gentle way of alerting Blowhard boyfriend that you do not belong to the same ideological group, and so this unproductive public discourse of just expressing group membership is not an activity that you find very enjoyable or very worthwhile. So there are ways that you can do this very subtly and very gently without stirring up animosity. Now, I suggest that you start with telling Blowhard that you're not familiar with some of the evidence that supports some of the beliefs that he holds, because he's obviously very expressive about his beliefs. So you can say, well, look, here's a particular belief that you've expressed, and I'm not familiar with what evidence actually supports that belief. So try to get him to discuss what support he has for those conclusions. Get him to discuss this. You can even, if you want to, you can even share these 4 principles with him and invite him into a productive discussion on a topic of his choice. Let him choose the topic. And you know, since you're unfamiliar with the belief structure of the Klown Kar Collective, this should be relatively straightforward. You'd say, look, I don't understand what evidence supports this claim. You have this belief. You believe this claim is true. So share with me. Let's shift from just expressing these beliefs to looking at these beliefs and discussing them, right? So what you're doing is you're very subtly shifting into a different kind of conversation, a different kind of activity. And Blowhard should be, usually most people, not all, but most people are really willing to kind of shift that way because they're interested in talking about what they believe. And especially if you're doing it in a non-threatening way. So you might find that he's more reasonable than he actually appears, because once he shifts into a different conversational mode and he has to apply these 4 principles, he might be actually quite rational, and he might have some interesting reasons for believing what he does. Now, you might still disagree with him, but it's still interesting to learn something. Now, you've had a productive discussion because you've learned something about him, and he's learned something about you. And he's going to be less inclined in the future to just go on and on and on and on about what he believes, because he's going to recognize, wait a minute now, there's a disconnect here, but it's not necessarily a threatening one. You need to make sure that it's not threatening. And you can do that very simply just by shifting your conversational behavior. Now remember, unproductive social discourse, or unproductive public discourse, not just social discourse, but public discourse, it's a very particular kind of social discourse. It can be socially beneficial, right? Because it provides group cohesiveness and a sense of belonging. And I think that when people automatically launch into that, that's what they're looking for, is a sense of belonging, right? They want to know that they're welcome in a particular environment. And some people do that by dominating the conversation and just expressing themselves. But if you satisfy that need in a different way, and oftentimes you can satisfy that need by just saying, tell me, let's have a discussion about what you believe. Explain to me, what are your reasons, and let's talk about it. That says you're interested in engaging this person. You're interested in welcoming them into a conversational space. That sometimes can satisfy that need and stop the blowhard behavior. So you just have to be gentle about it. Okay, so I think that's all for now. I think that one thing that I do want to say in closing is that I think people should be as willing to engage in productive public discourse as they are unproductive public discourse. We all engage in unproductive public discourse. We all need sometimes to just express group membership and feel a sense of belonging. But that only goes so far, and it's not sufficient to sustain a very healthy liberal democracy. So everybody needs to sort of commit to finding ways to shift their behavior a little bit to engage more in productive public discourse if they care about maintaining a liberal democracy. And we should all be caring about that, because it's been pretty clear over the last couple of years how fragile a liberal democracy really is, right? So I want to say good luck to Desperate in Cincinnati. Let us know how it goes with Blowhard. I suspect you'll have a positive result if you approach it gently and graciously. Now, next time on Shit Show, we're going to be discussing a related topic. We're going to be talking about the marketplace of ideas. What is the marketplace of ideas, and how is it related to the health of a liberal democracy? Well, tune in next time to find out. If you enjoyed this show, please remember to like and subscribe and to share it with anyone you think might enjoy it. Until then, may your shit be organized and sorted.